I am Mackenzie Kelly, and I got assigned the time period of 1920 to 1929, and this is my presentation. So this area is known as the Roaring Twenties, which can be attributed in part to shifting political views, economic power, and a social cultural metamorphosis that will leave a mark on history forever. The effects of World War I would have global implications, but with its conclusion came a breath of fresh air for America. And not only was the country done spending money on war, but we had also just entered a new age, also known as the Industrial Age. This surge of economic income could best be embodied by the flapper girl. Not like the emerging sound of jazz at this time, these girls were fun, vibrant, basically a breath of fresh air for America after what had seemed like a cultural dark age. Obviously, with new times comes newer, better inventions, also newer, better literature. So, people were trying to find out how much they could push boundaries and stereotypes to the edge. This was the age of testing and pushing limits, seeing how far people could get away with. After World War I, the government was done spending money on war. So, the economy almost doubled between 1920 to 1929, which swept many Americans into a consumer society. Many people let go and became one with the culture at this time. Partying, spending a large amount of monies was a new normal. Young people did what they wanted to, and that was the new way of life. So literary movements at this time were constantly fluctuating, depending on politics, the economy, and society. The term Renaissance brought up a belief that the great American culture was about to have great, bigger, better developments. The Southern Renaissance and the Harlem Renaissance shared aspects of the same material, but were only exclusive to members. In other words, no writer belonged to both. The Southern Renaissance writers used to focus on historical romances about the lost cause of the Confederate the Confederate States of America. This writing glorified heroism in the Confederate Army. In a way, the Southern Renaissance was giving a new life to the American Southern literature. Many writers were starting to use satire and fantasy and utilizing aphora and just all of these techniques within poetry. The Southern Renaissance writings like Henry Louis Mackayne's Sasha of the Beaux-Arts would soon get lost in the culture before the war and would never return to society, which is honestly really sad because some of those writings were really very pretty. On the opposite end of the spectrum was the Harlem Renaissance, which included intellectual, social, and artistic explosion based in Harlem, New York. Hence, Harlem Renaissance. At this time, this movement was called the New Negro Movement because African Americans were now participating in post-war celebrations. Obviously, with new movements comes educational and literary explosions, not based in one spot, but for this instant, it's based in Harlem, New York. Langston Hughes was born into a poor, troubled African-American family. At this time, he did not know he was going to be one of the greatest writers, but he is. His father abandoned him and his mother to immigrate to Mexico, so Langston and his mom moved in with his grandma, who lived in Lawrence, Kansas at the time. For most of his childhood, Langston Hughes was unhappy, lonely, and really just had no motivation or inspiration to write or do what he loved. In 1915, when him and his mother moved to Cleveland, Ohio, the move sparked something within Langston, and he began to publish poems and stories in his high school magazine. The things Langston published had to do with race and social justice, which Langston would end up writing about all his life. At the age of 17, Langston Hughes already knew what he wanted to do and what his calling was. On a train to visit his father in Mexico, he was inspired to write "The Negro Speaks of Rivers" as he crossed the Mississippi. Little did Langston know that this poem would soon be one of the greatest known poems of this time. The poem states, I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen muddy bosoms turn into golden sunsets. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like these rivers. So, The Negro Speaks of Rivers is one of Langston Hughes' most recognizable poems to this day. It was published in 1921 when he was only 17 years old, and I truly think that this poem stands for this time period because, obviously the New Negro movement was happening, and obviously the Harlem Renaissance was happening. I think this poem truly makes people think about where they have come from. So that's why I chose to write about it. So as Langston Hughes was writing this poem, he was inspired by the works of Carl Sandburg and Walt Whitman by using free verse as a basis of this poem. Even though Hughes did not technically write this poem in or about Harlem, he mentioned themes in the poem that would later become relevant to Harlem. Langston Hughes states that he has known rivers as ancient as the world and older than the blood in human veins. By using this choice of wording, the idea that his soul is older than he is, and that it has grown deep like ancient rivers. By utilizing anaphora, which is the repetition of words, which in his poem he used I bathed, I built, and I looked, and I heard. Hughes makes a point that he was not there in body, but in soul through his ancestors. He also links himself to his ancestors by placing them in important historical, religious, and cultural sites all over the world. By using the descriptions and locations of his poem, Hughes comes off as intellectual, which strengthens his connection between him and his ancestors. Also, by using these choices of wording, you would not expect that this was written by a 17-year-old. I chose this work to review this work because I thought that Langston Hughes truly embodies this time period and the culture that was brought up with it. The New Negro movement was a movement that was brought up by storm, unexpected and unpredictable, and yet Langston Hughes, only 17 years old, stormed right into it without fear and hesitation. I just think he's a really good inspiration for people to kind of step outside of the boundaries and step outside of the stereotypes. And if something comes up that you like, then I think that you should go for it and not be scared and basically storm into the store without hesitation, like I said. I also think Langston Hughes truly embodies the spirit of the Harlem Renaissance. And I think that The Negro Speaks of Rivers, being published within 1921, shows how the culture influences people to think, and how the New Negro movement made African Americans think about their ancestors and where they came from, and like think more in depth about Harlem Renaissance and the New Negro movement in general. Onwuchekwa Jimmy is a Nigerian scholar, poet, and journalist. Oh, and a professor who wrote a review about The Negro Speaks of Rivers. Jimmy states that it is the most profound of these poems of heritage and strength. And just by reading the poem, you can easily get a read on the heritage and culture and soul that comes pouring out of the words of Langston Hughes's poem. Hughes makes the poem strong with culture, heritage, and soul by linking him to his ancestors, obviously. But he also makes it strong with heritage by placing his ancestors in different historical spots around the world, and by saying that, like, for example, he built the, let me go back up to the poem, sorry. By example, like, his line, I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. Like, that has so much culture and heritage in it that I could understand where he's coming from and what he means by that. Jameen talks about how Hughes uses the rivers and historical references to build up the credibility of his poem and culture and heritage and his ancestors. Also, by using the free verse basis, it also like shows that he didn't really plan for this to be a poem, maybe not in this importance of a poem, but he also, like, he still planned for it to be significant of this time period. So the era known as the Roaring Twenties has had significant importance within today's society. Many ups and downs existed in the culture that formed within the era. Many cultural and literary movements influenced things that still happen today. Ahead of the time, the culture, and the people, humans still wanted to test boundaries and see how far they could go and get away with an idea. The New Negro movement is a movement that no one will ever forget. It influenced so many things in today's society and culture. It made people think outside of the box that they are used to, and it pushed people into a new world and into a new era and into a new mindset, most importantly. But Langston Hughes was one of the most iconic writers of this time. He played a big role into pushing people outside of the box that they were used to, like I said. With the poem, The Negro Speaks of Rivers, he connected himself to his ancestors and dug deeper within his heritage and culture by stating that his soul has grown deep within the rivers because of his ancestors and because of his culture and because of his heritage. By using important historical, religious, and cultural sites all over the world, he gains credibility that his soul is growing deep like the rivers and strengthens his connection to his ancestors. I truly think that the 1929s would not be known for what it is today if it did not have its ups and downs, its literary movements, its obviously cultural movements too. If people were not trying to push the boundaries of what they were used to. So that is it and all that I have for my presentation. Thank you guys so much.